They told him he didn't belong. Again. In a room full of billion-dollar deals, crystal chandeliers, and designer tuxedos, one man in a simple charcoal suit was told to leave. No shouting, no chaos, just calm dismissal and the snap of a hostess's fingers. But what they didn't know was this. He built the room they were standing in, and with one quiet phone call, $940 million vanished into thin air. Want to know what he said? Or what happened when the woman who mocked him had to call him sir? Then stay with me, because this story is going to turn everything upside down. Julian Westbrook arrived at La Ciel exactly on time. The restaurant glowed with candlelight and soft jazz, tucked on the 61st floor above Manhattan. Tonight was a charity dinner for tech equity, a cause Julian had not only supported, but funded. Dressed in a simple charcoal suit, crisp shirt, no tie, he exuded a quiet confidence. Yet the moment he reached the hostess stand, the air shifted. Camilla Hayes spotted him and stiffened. Tall, blonde, immaculately dressed, she was the gatekeeper of this sky-high sanctuary. "Good evening," Julian said calmly, holding out a formal printed invitation. She didn't take it. Instead, her eyes flicked over him. Skin, suit, shoes, then back to his face. "Sir, this is a private event," she said, her voice sugar-dipped but edged like glass. "I'm aware," he replied, still holding the invitation. She forced a smile. "I believe service staff use the back entrance." Someone behind her snickered. Two guests in designer dresses looked over their shoulders, then quickly looked away. Phones hovered, but no one stepped in. Julian didn't flinch. "I'm a guest." Camilla didn't even glance at the card. "Let's not make this uncomfortable," she said, then turned to a passing server and snapped her fingers. "Security, please." He lowered the invitation slowly, still didn't say a word. Camilla leaned in slightly. "I know the type. You sneak in, hope no one notices, cause a scene. I've seen it before." She was louder now, letting her voice float just far enough to be overheard. "It's a curated list, sir. Handpicked. You won't find yourself on it." A man in a tux muttered, "This is awkward." A woman sipped her wine, pretending not to stare. Julian stood still, expression unreadable. The card was still in his hand. He made no move to argue, explain, or resist. Camilla stepped forward, tilting her chin. "I'm going to ask you to leave, now, before things get uncomfortable." Security approached. Tall, hesitant, unsure. The atmosphere thickened. No one knew exactly what was happening, but everyone knew they didn't want to be involved. Still silent, Julian turned slightly, just enough to step aside, but not in defeat. It was measured, deliberate, like a move in chess, one that confuses the opponent. One of the guests whispered, "Who is he?" Camilla smiled, victorious, but only for a moment. Because something about the way Julian walked, not rushed, not angry, just calm, stirred something in the room. Confusion, curiosity, doubt. He vanished through the glass doors as the city shimmered behind him. Not a single word spoken, but everyone felt it. This wasn't over. Julian stepped out into the night, the door to La Ciel closing softly behind him. Manhattan's late summer breeze brushed against his face, cooler than expected. Inside, laughter resumed. Glasses clinked, and the illusion of exclusivity sealed itself once more. He didn't check his watch. He didn't look back. But inside, someone had recorded it all. Camilla's tone, the silence of the crowd, the security guard's hesitation. A video no longer than 30 seconds was already pulsing on social media with the caption, "When power walks away silently, ask yourself who you just dismissed." Julian stood still on the curb, eyes on the traffic. The weight of the moment didn't show in his posture, only in the way he exhaled, measured, slow. Then, from across the street, a small voice pierced the hum of the city. "Mom, that's him! That's the man from the scholarship billboard. Julian turned. A little girl, maybe 8, ran toward him clutching a bundle of wrapped roses. Her cheeks were flushed from running. Behind her, a woman, her mother, called out, apologetic and breathless, trying to catch up. "I'm so sorry, sir, she just—" But Julian knelt down, meeting the girl's bright eyes. "You recognize me?" he asked gently. The girl nodded. "You gave my mommy money so she could go back to school. Now she's gonna be a nurse." Julian looked up at the woman. She was holding a basket of roses and a hand-painted sign, "Single Mom. Will work for school fees." He smiled softly, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out his wallet, not for money, but for a worn photo. It showed a younger Julian, standing in front of a shelter kitchen, handing out food. "Sometimes the world forgets who you are," he said, showing the girl the photo. "But you never forget why you started." The girl beamed. The mother's eyes shimmered with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You changed our lives." Julian placed a hand over his heart. "You're the reason I don't stop." Behind him, the lights of La Ciel glittered, indifferent. But something deeper flickered in the scene now, a legacy that couldn't be dismissed at a Hostess stand. As the woman handed him a single rose in thanks, Julian's phone buzzed. A silent vibration. A message that read, "The fund has been flagged. Awaiting your confirmation." He didn't respond yet. He looked down at the rose, then at the girl again. Sometimes, walking away wasn't surrender. It was recalibration. It was the breath before the storm. Back inside La Ciel, Camilla basked in the quiet satisfaction of what she considered a job well done. "I just escorted a gatecrasher out," she told a cluster of guests near the wine display. Her voice was hushed, but with just enough volume to be overheard. "Some men really think a suit and a fake smile can buy them into circles they don't belong." A few guests chuckled politely. One raised an eyebrow. Another murmured, "Good eye." Camilla smirked. Power surged through her veins, not from kindness, but control. Just then, a soft ding echoed from the staff elevator. Out stepped Mr. Dalton, the floor manager, graying at the temples, pressed navy vest, hands behind his back. His usual calm demeanor held a hint of edge tonight. He scanned the room, noted the unease in a few faces, and walked straight toward Camilla. "Camilla," he said, tone clipped. "What happened out here?" "Oh, nothing that can't be handled," she said, brushing her blonde curls back. "A man tried to walk in claiming he was invited. No name on the list, no confirmation. Looked like he wandered in from the valet line." Dalton blinked. "Did you check the revised guest list from the Foundation's end?" She hesitated. "Well, I didn't need to. It was obvious he didn't—" Psst! Dalton's phone buzzed sharply. He glanced down. His face shifted, then it buzzed again, and again. He tapped rapidly. Red. His pupils narrowed. Without a word, he turned away and marched toward the bar. A second later, he waved for the maitre d' to join him. Camilla, now mildly confused, drifted after him. Dalton's voice, low but firm, cut the air. "Our merchant account is frozen." "What?" "Not just the card reader, the whole account. All transactions flagged." Camilla blinked. "That doesn't make sense. It was just one guy." Dalton's phone rang again. He stepped aside to answer. "Yes? Wait, what? The Department of Financial Oversight?" "No, sir, we weren't notified. Yes, I'll cooperate." He hung up, face pale. "Camilla," he said tightly, "do you know the name of the man you escorted out?" "No," she said. "He wouldn't give it. Didn't matter. He didn't belong." Dalton stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "That man was Julian Westbrook." Camilla's face lost color. "That's impossible." "No," Dalton said. "What's impossible is the fact that his foundation's donation covered the entire operating cost of this night. And now, it's in question. And worse, so is our license." Just then, a man in a blazer flashed a badge at the front desk. 2 others followed. Dalton exhaled hard. Camilla, you didn't just turn away a guest. You may have just killed our year. Julian stood across the street from La Ciel, under the soft glow of a street lamp, the rose from the little girl still in his hand. He hadn't moved much since leaving, just watched, observed. The city flowed around him, cars, voices, neon reflections. But Julian remained still, a quiet pivot in the chaos. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with confusion and tension. But outside, a different recognition was stirring. "Wait a minute," a voice murmured nearby. Julian turned slightly. An older man in a tailored tuxedo stood near the valet stand, drink in hand, staring. His face bore the practiced ease of wealth, but his eyes now held curiosity. Then disbelief. "Are you Westbrook?" he asked. "Julian Westbrook, from the AI Reconstruction Fund?" Julian offered a polite nod. The man took a step closer, lowering his glass. "I thought so. Damn. I read about your work in Kyiv, rebuilding logistics through predictive modeling. I sit on the board of the new Infrastructure Council. We've been tracking your impact." Julian nodded again, expression neutral. "I remember your name. John Andler." John chuckled. "Didn't think you'd recognize an old venture capitalist like me." "I remember everyone who tried to buy out my first company at half its value," Julian said softly. That made John laugh out loud. "Fair enough. Touché." Then his laughter faded as realization dawned. "Wait, what are you doing out here? You're part of tonight's guest list, aren't you?" Julian's silence answered him better than words. John's brow furrowed. He turned toward the restaurant. "Who the hell told you to leave?" Julian didn't respond, just glanced briefly at the glass doors. John's voice dropped. "No, don't tell me it was Camilla. That girl thinks she's HR for heaven, screening angels." He grabbed his phone. "Give me 1 second." Julian raised a hand, not in protest, just calm control. But John was already dialing. "Dalton, it's Andler. What in God's name is going on in there? You froze the accounts? Westbrook's outside. Yes, that Westbrook. The reason we're hosting this bloody fundraiser in the first place." "What do you mean you didn't know?" "Didn't know? The man's worth more than our last 5 investors combined." He hung up, flustered, muttering to himself. Julian remained where he was. "I'll walk you back in," John offered. Julian shook his head, eyes still on the building. "Not yet." John looked at him, really looked. The composure, the restraint, the way the city's chaos didn't touch him. He nodded slowly, respectfully. "No rush," he said. "When you go back in, it won't be as a guest. It'll be as the storm they weren't ready for." Julian stepped a few paces away from the valet stand, where the warm glow of La Ciel was now just a shimmer behind glass. He stood beside a planter of white hydrangeas, pulled his phone from his jacket, and stared at the screen for a moment. Then, with deliberate calm, he tapped one contact. No scrolling, no hesitation. The line picked up instantly. He said only 5 words. "Freeze the fund. I'll explain later." Then, silence. The person on the other end didn't speak. They just nodded. A firm, singular movement of understanding. The kind of nod that didn't need clarification. That's all Julian needed. He ended the call, slid the phone back into his pocket, and watched the lights in the restaurant across the street. At first, nothing changed. The clinking of glassware, waiters circling with trays of scallops and champagne, guests laughing, nervous, shallow. Then it began. Inside La Ciel, at table 7 near the terrace, a woman with a Hermes clutch reached for the billfold a server had discreetly placed at her elbow. She pulled out her platinum card and handed it over with a well-practiced smile. The server returned moments later. Confusion etched across his face. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The payment didn't go through," she blinked. "That's not possible. Run it again." He did, twice, still declined. 2 tables over, another guest tried to pre-authorize an event donation. Same message, card declined, again. By the third incident, murmurs began spreading like spilled wine. What's happening? Did the system crash? No, my other cards work fine. Back at the bar, a quiet alert pinged on the POS terminal. Merchant account suspended. Code 712. The bartender frowned, refreshed the page. Same result. Dalton's phone rang again, this time from the financial controller. Multiple high-value transactions blocked. Systems are red flagged. External freeze notice pending federal audit, the voice said. Dalton turned toward the dining room, sweat beading at his temple. What the hell is going on? Camilla, now at the wine cart, looked up at the stirring tension. Andler, still near the door, tucked his own phone away and shook his head. Across the street, Julian hadn't moved. To the average onlooker, he was just a man standing beneath a street lamp. But those watching closely, really watching, could sense the axis shifting. No anger, no revenge speech. Just a phone call and a ripple large enough to shake the foundation of the very place that had rejected him. It wasn't just silence, it was strategy, and it was only beginning. On the sidewalk just across from La Ciel, a woman in a black jumpsuit angled her phone upward, subtly but precisely. Her name was Maya Fields, a freelance photojournalist known for documenting microaggressions in elite spaces. She hadn't planned to cover anything tonight. She was meeting a friend, sipping an overpriced espresso from the cafe next door, when she saw the moment Julian was turned away. Her camera app had been rolling ever since. She posted the 30-second clip with a caption, "Black man in a suit turned away from La Ciel despite formal invite. No one intervened. No one asked. Just silence." She added the hashtag #LaCielRacist. It took 4 minutes to hit 10,000 views. By the 7th minute, it reached 100K. Major accounts reposted it. Activists, influencers, even a few celebrities. A stitched video surfaced showing Julian's past interviews, his TED Talk about equity in AI, his $15 million donation to refugee housing, his surprise visits to public schools he once attended. This wasn't just a man rejected. This was a man erased by a system he quietly helped build. Inside La Ciel, the tension was no longer subtle. Dalton's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Camilla, standing awkwardly by the wine station, noticed the Hostess stand was empty. The maitre d' was nowhere in sight. Staff huddled behind the service wall, whispering, panicked. Guests started pulling out their phones. "Wait, he's Westbrook?" Someone gasped, scrolling. Another chimed in. "Oh my God, this hashtag, we're literally in a trending scandal." A third guest, visibly uncomfortable, said, "Are we still eating dessert while the internet thinks we're complicit?" A woman at table 4 whispered to her date, "Didn't we just laugh when she said he didn't belong?" Her date swallowed hard. "That was before we knew." "No," she said sharply. "That was before we cared." At minute 12, Maya uploaded a second clip, this time spliced with Julian's name being called at a previous White House gala. Viewers connected dots fast. By minute 15, #LaCielRacist hit #1 on Twitter's trending list. Julian hadn't moved from his post under the streetlight. He simply watched. John Andler came to stand beside him again, phone in hand. "You've turned a dinner into a reckoning," he said, not unkindly. Julian glanced at the glow of the restaurant. "I didn't start the fire. I just stopped holding the hose." Across the street, Camilla stared out the window, finally seeing the man she dismissed not as a stranger, but as a mirror of everything the world had been pretending wasn't real. And the world was watching now. Julian crossed the street with the same calm, measured steps he had taken hours before. But this time, the air shifted around him. Not resistance, recognition. The glass doors of La Ciel parted without protest. Inside, a hush fell like a curtain. Servers paused mid-pour. Guests froze in conversation. And from the far end of the dining room, Mr. Dalton rushed forward, his face pale, his tie slightly loosened from the chaos of the past hour. He stopped just a few feet from Julian and lowered his gaze. "Mr. Westbrook," he said, "on behalf of our entire team, our deepest apologies." The room held its breath. Julian's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Dalton, no need for theatrics. We're past that now." Dalton nodded quickly, retreating 2 steps as if the air itself had thickened around Julian. From the corner, Camilla stood frozen, her mouth parted slightly. She looked smaller now, no podium to stand behind, no clipboard to grip like a weapon. Her posture collapsed in on itself. Julian didn't look at her. Not yet. He turned to face the room. "I won't be staying long," he began, tone even. "I didn't come tonight to reclaim a seat at a table. I came because I funded the table." Murmurs. One woman gasped audibly. Another man's glass slipped slightly in his hand, clinking against the marble bar. Julian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim leather folio. Inside, a single document, signed and embossed. "6 months ago," he continued, "my firm acquired a 27% equity stake in the La Ciel Hospitality Group. I did so quietly, believing progress didn't always need applause." He laid the folio on the reception podium. "But tonight reminded me that silence sometimes enables the wrong people to speak louder." Camilla's knees visibly buckled. She gripped the edge of a side table to steady herself. A ripple went through the guests. Not just surprise, but shame. Regret. Julian finally turned toward Camilla. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. He didn't speak to her, just held her gaze for a beat longer than comfort allowed. Then he looked past her, to the other staff, the guests, the system. "I've invested in a lot of things," he said. "Technology, education, infrastructure, but dignity. That's one investment you can't fake. Either you value it in others, or you don't." He turned, walking toward the exit again, not storming out, not lingering, just leaving the truth behind like a signature carved into stone. And for the first time all night, no one dared stop him. The silence after Julian's departure was deafening. Camilla stood motionless, every eye in the room brushing past her like a spotlight gone cold. Her once flawless posture now looked brittle, arms folded too tightly, breath caught too high in her chest. A server passed by with a tray of espresso and petit four, veering slightly to avoid her without making eye contact. Across the room, Mr. Dalton finished a tense conversation with the maitre d', then made his way over. His expression was unreadable, professional but firm. "Camilla," he said, not unkindly, "I think it's best if you take a step back, effective immediately." Her voice cracked on instinct. "You're suspending me?" "I'm asking you to take a leave," he clarified. "Pending internal review." She looked around, grasping for any sign of support. The bartender wouldn't meet her eyes. The hostess trainee she'd once scolded was staring at her with lips pressed tight. Even the sommelier, who'd once flirted with her over menus, turned away. "I was doing my job," she said, voice rising slightly. "I followed protocol." Dalton's gaze was steely. "Protocol doesn't include humiliating investors." She opened her mouth to protest again. "Let her stay." The words came from the door. Everyone turned. Julian stood there once more, just inside the entrance, his presence calm but undeniable. "She doesn't need to be fired," he said evenly. "She needs to see what change actually looks like." Dalton looked stunned. "Sir, are you sure?" Julian nodded. "Firing her would let everyone off the hook. They'd say it was just one person, just one mistake. But this was a system." Camilla's lips parted, but no sound came out. Julian continued. "Let her witness what accountability feels like. Let her serve the people she thought didn't belong." Whispers rippled through the guests. One woman near the bar murmured, "He's giving her grace she didn't earn." Another replied, "Exactly. That's the difference." Julian didn't wait for applause. He turned and walked out for the final time, leaving a silence thicker than judgment. Camilla, still rooted to the floor, felt the sting not just of punishment, but of mercy. And that, somehow, was harder to bear. She turned to Dalton. He nodded. "You'll stay, but not at the front." And just like that, The woman who once stood at the threshold of judgment now stepped into the quiet, uncomfortable space of reflection, surrounded, but utterly alone. 2 days later, Lacielle's name no longer conjured whispers of elegance. The financial freeze initiated by Julian's quiet phone call had evolved into something far more devastating. An emergency board meeting had been called. Westbrook Capital had issued a formal statement. Effective immediately, we are withdrawing all financial interest and advisory participation from Lacielle Hospitality Group. All pending capital allocations, including the $940 million expansion initiative, are suspended indefinitely. It hit like a shockwave. In one sentence, dreams of 8 new luxury locations across Miami, Paris, Dubai evaporated. Vendors who had been promised contracts received polite retraction emails. Construction firms canceled permits. A prestigious PR agency dropped Lacielle from its client list. Creditors, once eager, now demanded upfront reassessment. Within 48 hours, Lacielle's valuation dropped by nearly 60%. Staff whispered of layoffs. The corporate office began freezing hiring. Dalton's inbox overflowed with withdrawal notices from other investors, some citing ethics, others merely panic. In a quiet corner of the office, the finance director stared at a color-coded spreadsheet turning from green to red in real time. And in the middle of it all, Camilla sat alone at a service desk, folding napkins. No podium, no clipboard. Just silence and linen. No one said it aloud, but they all knew. This wasn't the result of a single insult. It was a response to a structure built on silent bias. Julian hadn't burned the house. He'd simply walked out and taken the electricity with him. Across the internet, headlines swirled. Billionaire pulls plug on hospitality giant after racial profiling incident. $940 million lost over one judgmental moment. When the quietest man in the room owns the room. Public opinion wasn't violent. It was decisive. And that was worse. A former Lacielle executive tweeted, "Julian Westbrook showed more class in 5 minutes than this company managed in 5 years." It garnered 2 million likes. Dalton, now visibly aged, stood in the break room staring out the window. He didn't speak when Camilla passed behind him. He didn't need to. The entire building was holding its breath. In a private email, Julian wrote only one sentence to the board. "I invest in potential, not arrogance." And with that, Lacielle's future unraveled, quietly, swiftly, just as Julian had walked away. For the audience who had followed every beat of the story, this was the moment of balance. Not revenge, not spectacle, just the inevitable weight of consequence. 1 week later, a press release sent quiet shockwaves through the hospitality industry. Westbrook Capital announces the launch of the Table Initiative, a social impact restaurant model focused on equity, leadership training, and workforce inclusion. Location, 61st floor Manhattan, the former home of Lacielle. The statement was brief. No self-congratulation, no fanfare, but its meaning was seismic. Julian wasn't walking away. He was rebuilding. Same floor, same windows, same sweeping skyline. But everything else? Different. The new restaurant, named the Foundry, would prioritize hiring and training staff from underrepresented communities, immigrants, single parents, returning citizens, and those historically excluded from elite service spaces. Every role, from front of house to management, would include mentorship and career development. The announcement stunned former Lacielle loyalists. But the most surprising name appeared at the bottom of the press release. Camilla Hayes, Training Cohort 001, Guest Relations Track. Media scrambled to make sense of it. Had Julian offered her a role? Was it optics? Strategy? No, it was intention. Camilla had been given a choice. Disappear quietly or return. Not to reclaim status, but to relearn purpose. She had accepted. On her first day, she wore a plain black shirt and slacks. No heels, no clipboard. She sat in a folding chair beside a single mom from Harlem, a former server from Detroit. and a trans man who had been rejected by 5 different Michelin kitchens. They all wore the same badge, here to learn. Julian watched them from a distance, arms folded. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. For him, justice wasn't in removing someone. It was in reorienting the system that shaped them. When a reporter asked him why he allowed Camilla to join, his answer was simple. Accountability without opportunity is just exile. Public reaction was mixed, but mostly awed. Some accused him of being too soft. Others called it revolutionary. But for those who had followed his journey, it was the moment that reframed everything. Because Julian hadn't destroyed La Ciel. He'd reimagined what it could have been if inclusion had been the foundation, not the afterthought. Inside the training room, Camilla struggled through her first mock greeting exercise. She stumbled over phrases, unsure whether to smile or stay neutral. But when she looked up, no one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. She realized this wasn't punishment. It was a beginning. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was above anyone. She felt human. And that, Julian knew, was the first ingredient of real change. The Foundry's soft opening was a quiet affair. No press, no influencers. Just a gathering of staff, partners, and a few community leaders. Julian stood at the far end of the main hall, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the team rehearse table placements and service routines. Later that evening, after the last plate had been wiped down and chairs stacked, someone asked him, gently, "Why this? Why not just build something bigger somewhere else?" Julian leaned against the counter, smile faint. "Because this place is where I disappeared once." They looked at him, puzzled. He set down his cup, gaze distant now, voice lower. 15 years ago, I stood in this very building, not as an owner, not even as a guest. I was 17, working the back line. Dishwasher, prep, late-night cleaner. I worked double shifts just to cover rent and my mother's meds. A few of the newer trainees paused, drawn closer by the story. One night, a hostess stormed into the kitchen, angry that a busboy hadn't cleared a table quickly enough. She saw me, pointed, and snapped, "You're not paid to stand there looking dumb. You're paid to be invisible." The room fell utterly silent. Julian took a breath. She told me I didn't belong, not even in the kitchen, that if I wanted to see the dining room, I'd better come with a mop. A quiet inhale broke the hush. Camilla, sitting off to the side, looked up slowly. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Julian turned his head just enough to catch her gaze. "I never forgot her voice," he said. "How confidently she dismissed me, like I was already decided for." Camilla's lips parted. Her face paled. What was her name?" she asked, almost inaudibly. He answered without venom, only calm clarity. "Elaine Hayes." Her breath hitched. That was my mother." A wave of realization swept the room. Not scandalous, but heavy, poetic, complete. Camilla's eyes glossed, not just from shame, but from recognition. She hadn't become her mother, but she had echoed her. Julian stepped closer, his voice now for her alone. "I don't believe in inherited guilt, but I do believe in breaking patterns." He didn't accuse her. He didn't shame her. He simply told the truth. The full circle didn't need dramatics. It landed softly, but powerfully. Camilla lowered her head, whispering, "Thank you for not walking away." Julian gave the smallest nod. Because the greatest redemption isn't silence, it's reflection. And the rare courage to let the past rise, not to haunt, but to heal. Opening night at the Foundry arrived beneath a sky laced with gold and steel. The Manhattan skyline shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside the restaurant, everything was hushed, like the air itself was holding its breath. There were no red carpets, no camera flashes, no press banners, just polished wood, soft jazz, and the quiet rhythm of dignity rebuilt. Julian entered without announcement. He wore no tuxedo, No entourage behind him. Just a deep navy suit, hands in his pockets, and a presence that turned heads not through noise, but gravity. As he walked through the foyer, the room didn't erupt into applause. It stilled. Staff moved gently out of his path, not in fear, but in respect. Guests murmured his name, then silenced themselves. Not one asked for a photo. Not one extended a hand. Because this wasn't about him. This was about what he made possible. Near the center of the room, Camilla stood beside a table, setting down a menu with steady hands. Her posture had changed. Less rigid, more grounded. The crispness in her uniform now matched her tone, not her pride. She looked up as Julian approached, and for a brief second, their eyes met. She didn't smile. She didn't avert her gaze. She simply nodded, with humility. And Julian? He nodded back. Nothing more. No words. No grand gestures. Because sometimes, silence is heavier than speeches. He moved on, taking a seat near the window, facing the city that had once turned its back on him. Now, it reflected in his glass, just light and possibility. The meal unfolded around him. Servers moved like dancers. Guests leaned into each other's conversations. Laughter gently returned to the space. But the tone never shifted back to spectacle. It stayed reverent. At one table, a young trainee who had once been homeless now explained the ingredients in the tasting menu with quiet authority. At another, a single mother guided a wine pairing with practiced grace. Camilla stood in the background, not as the center, but as part of the whole. Julian watched. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't remind anyone who he was. He didn't have to, because true power doesn't demand a microphone. It shapes the room by its presence, not its volume. As the evening closed, a soft instrumental played, an original composition, written by a former busboy now studying music through the Foundry's education fund. Julian rose, placed his napkin on the table, and gave the room one last look. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. The weight of a man who chose not vengeance, but vision. And when he left, it wasn't the door that echoed, it was the silence that remained.